And they said, well, you know, I look at Saturday morning shows, and I've never seen a kid on those Saturday morning shows. There are a bunch of old white guys doing it. So as a kid, I want to do things that kids do. And so my point here is this: you buy things that look like you. And what kind of messages are the agencies sending in terms of who participates in all of the opportunities that we provide? You buy things that look like you. Again, moving through quickly, that fifth major trend is the increase in foreign-born populations as a percentage of the total population. And again, these numbers are projected to go way out. These are only 2010, because that's the last time the census was done. It'll be done in 2020 again, so when I come back in 2021, I'll be able to present new information for you. But that's going to be increased as well. And so again, we are being faced, and we know what they are. We know what these 5 broad trends are that are facing the populations that we serve across the U.S. And so the question is what are we doing? The demographic question, the question that you probably asked me to come to talk about is, well, how do these things influence what it is that we do? Well, here's something that I showed you, which seemed like a long time ago, of factors affecting hunting participation. What are those 5 factors that I talked about that said we're really hurting hunting? Urbanization, aging society, fewer whites, less access, and less opportunity. At least 4 of those 5 are going against what the trends are in hunting in a negative way. So that's pretty scary for those of us who care so deeply about America's hunting tradition. I talked to you about urban versus rural individuals and their participation in hunting. And I showed you this graph. And when you start putting those together, it becomes scary as well in terms of the future of hunting and fishing. This is a graph that I plotted for you in terms of the percentage of urban residents who do those various activities that we talk about. Hunting, fishing, luckily a little bit of an increase, and wildlife viewing even more so. So again, there's demographic trends in their participation, and you can start putting those together in terms of what's going to happen in the future. I put this together for you in terms of age. We know that Bureau of Census says we're getting older. And so I plotted out, well, what do people do as the cohorts move through these age categories? Hunting shows a decline, fishing shows a decline, and viewing somewhat of an increase. And so all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe there's hope in terms of participation levels in terms of some of these activities that we manage. So finally, you asked me to talk about attitudes toward funding. And over the past 25 years, I've done a ton of work on funding issues and helping agencies get license increases, get 1/8% sales tax increases, and all sorts of stuff. And I thought, really appreciate Ed asking me about that, because I can pull all of my knowledge together and tell you exactly what to do. Well, you know, and I knew this. That wasn't a new revelation. But, you know, I can't tell you a whole lot. And I can tell you that in the products that we've done, maybe 100 different studies and literally dozens of getting increase and stuff, it just plain changes. I mean, while I feel very confident in telling you about public values across North America, and they probably hold pretty true in Tennessee in a lot of these things, funding is different every time I do it. It varies by state. I can do a study in Arkansas, I can do a study in Illinois, I can do a study in Florida, and it's not going to relate to Tennessee. I can do a study in Arkansas in 1993, and it's going to be different than 1994 or 1995. And we went for that 1/8% sales tax increase. As we started to get to that vote, you all are familiar with Arkansas's 1/8% sales tax increase. Missouri has one. Minnesota just had, I think, a 3/8%. So various states are going toward different sales tax and a lot of different things. But there's lots of commonalities in terms of developing campaigns, but in terms of actual data, there are not a lot of commonalities. Because for Arkansas, what I started to talk about with Arkansas is every time that we started getting closer to that vote, that percentage who was going to vote for that started to decline and decline more. And by the time we did that vote, it didn't pass by that much. I think if a year later, it probably wouldn't have passed because The media can influence the way people vote and other things. And so my major observation for you is that there's not a whole lot of commonalities. Funding varies by state in terms of attitudes toward various issues. It varies by time period, and it varies by political and economic climate. I can do a study for you this year that's going to be sour milk in 2 or 3 years from now, probably. Or I could have done a study for you 3 or 4 years ago. And so there's not sort of, I can say, well, you should do this or you should do that. I can tell you, though, that one of the things that a lot of the state agencies have looked at is this whole idea of an excise tax on outdoor recreation equipment. Because that's pretty cool. Hey, it worked in 1937 with federal aid, right? We taxed hunting and then fishing equipment later on, and then boating and motorboat fuel and stuff. So we should do the same thing for bird seed or binoculars, things that people watch wildlife with. That makes sense, doesn't it? That would pass easily. This is a study that we just did for the Pennsylvania Game Commission that shows, man, that thing ain't going to fly. That's not going to fly. Look at that. You have 42%, 27% strongly opposing. Now, there's a lot more to it than just public opinion polls. But my point is this. Some of the very things that agency people say, well, we should do this because of this, don't really hold up when you start doing the research. Remember how I started this presentation about the science of wildlife and the science of habitat and how good a scientists we are when it comes to that? But when it comes to people, we're not as scientific as we should be. And that holds true here. Had they gone any further with this idea, it probably would have been a bad one. And we've tried. We've been trying literally for 30 years to try to do some things, and here's why. The other thing that I can tell you, this is from a study we did in Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania Game Commission on funding. This was on their non-game program. But I just wanted to show you. And I'm not going to talk about specifics because agencies across the U.S. have gotten together and identified about 100 to 150 different possible ideas that we could get money from. So I can't stand up here and an hour and a half lecture and say, well, you should do this or you should do that. What I can tell you is that we've got a body of work, and there's a body of work out there in terms of how to proceed to get money and proper ways to move and research that should be done, not only from this perspective, from a message testing standpoint, from a campaign testing standpoint, to move in a successful direction. But there's not just one thing that agencies should do because it differs. It differs by state, it differs by time period, and it differs by political and economic climates. So, well, what about the future? Because people are always saying, well, what about the future of fish and wildlife agencies? And I sort of put this together a few years ago because I was asked to lecture about the future, which is always scary because I have no idea. But where we are, of this, are we a hunting agency, a fishing agency, or are we more of a comprehensive conservation agency? And the truth is, you can look at it that there's a couple of ways to go. Some of the agencies just want to move back to being a fishing and hunting agency, and that's that. They're going to dig their heels in, and they're going to sort of, if you've heard the term, recruit and retain their way out of this issue. Well, we're just going to get more hunters. And we've done a lot of that work in terms of how to get more people to hunt or more people to fish or more people to boat. And that's certainly a direction that agencies can go in. There's other organizations that talk, well, they can go into being more of a comprehensive. They can leave hunters and anglers behind. And it's a bad idea because that's who we work for, that's who we are. But then there's other people who sort of talk about, well, maybe we should start broadening in terms of what it is that we do. And a lot of the agencies are struggling with that, and we have been for the past 10 years. Ducks Unlimited is grappling with that as well. I talked to them a couple months ago, or they all run together now, but within the past few months about the future and the development of their strategic plan and directions to go. But whenever I'm in a quandary on things in terms of that, I go back to Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife management, who had this to say about it. He said, well, in the long run, lopsided programs dealing with game only, songbirds only, forests only, or fish only will fail because they cost too much. They use up too much energy and friction and lack sufficient volume of support. So I would say as we sort of move into the future that it's really important to look at our past and to draw on the history of what state agencies are and, quite frankly, what the incredible history of fish and wildlife management is. From my perspective, that future not only includes understanding fish and wildlife populations, fish and wildlife habitats, but also those people side of things, especially bringing in that human dimension or the scientific part of things. So I know it was long. I presented a lot of facts at you, but my goal was not to entertain you as much as make you smarter, and I hope you're smarter now at noontime about some of these issues that are facing you than you were at 9 o'clock. So I might not have entertained you, but I hopefully injected some new knowledge into you. I want to say, this is about, I don't know how many, the 5th, 6th, 7th time over the past 20 years that I've presented here in the building there and in other places throughout Tennessee. I really appreciate being asked to come here and to talk to you. I haven't gone anywhere for 25 years, and I'm not going anywhere for 25 years. So if you've got questions, if I said something you don't want to ask questions here, but feel free to email me or something. And Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Carter, I thank you for being here. And a couple of those people this morning left, but I always know I'm among friends here, but it also hit me that I was sort of among heroes in those 3 people that you commemorated at first. So friends and heroes and commissioners, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Any questions for Mark from the commission? Man, you've done a good job explaining things.
Or they're just like, no more.
No, Commissioner Cox has got one.
Or do you think that the shooting programs are helping recruit into hunting?
Good question. You ask great questions. That's a $1 million question. We're trying to see if that's true. I think that we're not there yet to say so. That's a big program with NASP, the National Archery in the Schools program. Are we taking kids in schools who do archery into bow hunting? I think that's yet to be determined. I think the answer is yes, a little bit, but I think that there's more to be done, and we're not sure. We're still working on what that might be. I can tell you that I think shooting is important in and of itself. If we're getting money from shooters, I don't think there's anything wrong with having shooting ranges that at some point, I think some of those people are going to move into hunting. But from a perspective of constituents, I think hunters are incredibly important and are in the core of what we do. I think anglers are incredibly important in the core of what we do. I think wildlife viewers should be important in the core of what we do. But I also think archers unto themselves, that 15-year-old girl who just wants to be like Katniss, or a shooter who wants to do competition shooting, is just as important to agencies, and it's our job to draw them into the agency even in and of themselves. I think ultimately I would love to make a 15-year-old female who wants to be Katniss to go bow hunting with me, and I would love to somebody I've shared my range with to come hunting with me. But I think it's also okay that if they're there and we bring them in even to the larger role of how they are contributing to the future of wildlife conservation. Sometimes we don't have to make every one of those shooters or every one of those archers a hunter or an angler or something, that it's okay to have them in and of themselves. So a long-winded answer, I think it's happening, but it's not as much as we would like for it to happen, but we're still working on ways to do that, especially with National Archery in the Schools program and other shooting programs like that. Good question, mediocre answer.
Anybody else? Director Carter?
Mark, I have a lot of questions, but along this same line, I'll just narrow it down to this one. We have a number of recruitment programs for youth, and we have women in the outdoors, and a number of others, but I've heard an argument lately that we're really missing the boat, that we really should be concentrating our most effort in those people in their late 20s, early 30s who have first disposable income and don't really necessarily have to have a mentor as you would if you were younger. Is there anything in your information that would lead you to believe there's a singular group that's best to concentrate on?
Oh gosh, another great question. I can give you a mediocre answer. I mean, we've done a lot of work in that area. We just finished a 4-year-long project with the National Wild Turkey Federation evaluating recruitment and retention programs. Across the U.S., there are about 410, there's more than 400 recruitment and retention programs from women in the outdoors, becoming an outdoors woman. I mean, all of those incredible programs, 400 plus different programs. And the question is, what works and what doesn't? And so what we did is we interviewed people in a scientific manner, surveyed people who went into that program, and then what they looked like when they came out. And so how interested are you in going fishing or shooting or hunting? Are there percent males, percent females? What are their attitudes? What are their values? There's an incredible study. It was, I'm trying to think of the name. I think it was called an evaluation of recruitment and retention programs, but I can get you that report. But we learned a lot of stuff. One of the things that we learned was upwards of about 90% of the people going into those hunting and fishing and shooting programs had already been hunting and fishing and shooting. And it was really important for me to make the observation that a lot of those people who were in our recruitment programs were really probably not being recruited. They were probably your kids and my kids and other people. So they looked a lot like us. So nationwide, we weren't doing a really good job of going out to other non-traditional audiences, if you will. So that's one thing. And I'm going to answer your question, but there's a body of literature out there that clearly shows that people who are recruited, or not recruited, but who start hunting and fishing, and even shooting to an extent, when they're younger, are more likely to be hunters in 20 years, that there's a much higher dropout rate of people who start participating in their late 20s and 30s. So with that said, I'm probably going to opt out on that question because I think then it becomes a policy issue. And I don't have an answer. I mean, there's a saying that says science seeks questions, policy demands answers. I kind of do the question part of it. But I think in the science part of it, I think that's a policy decision. And so I think you could argue you might get more immediate returns from people who are being recruited as older adults. So I think there's some real arguments for that. But then there's a research side of things that says, but if you do, the guy might be twice as likely to drop out. But hey, if you get him for 2 or 3 years, you might get license buying, you might get all that federal aid money, you might make a more urban individual conservationist. So I think there's arguments both ways, and I think it's a policy decision. And I support both. I mean, I do support the idea of going out of our comfort zone. What I don't want to do is go to a hunting recruitment program and seeing our kids there, because they probably would have been there somewhere else. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because we also know from a hunting and recruitment standpoint that it's not a one-time thing. That to recruit a hunter, I've got to take you out once, and I've got to take you out again, and I've got to take you out again, and after 4 or 5 years, you're going to grow into that hunting culture and become a true hunter. And so I think that's more of a policy decision. I do think that we need to have different types of programs. The other thing that I learned in evaluating 400 plus hunting recruitment and fishing and shooting recruitment, retention and reactivation programs is that there needs to be a diversity of programs out there. A lot of our programs look a lot alike. Kids, hunting, and that's that. And I think that the more the programs like Women in the Outdoors, the women-only programs, this guy that is my shooting instructor has a woman-only concealed weapon class that's extremely successful. And so I really like those types of classes where you buy things that look like you. I think those are important. So from a recruitment retention standpoint, I think that a diversity is better, and what I really mean by that is programs that are truly different. We've gone into state agencies and evaluated their programs, their recruitment retention programs. They have 10 of them. You know what? They're all recruiting the exact same people, and they all kind of look alike, kind of the exact same thing. Do they have special programs for women only, for even in urban areas or inner city areas? And so I would say to you that from a lot of experience in evaluating those programs, make sure you're not recruiting the same kids that probably would have been recruited anyways, but don't forget about retention. I would say those special programs for women, for youth, for African Americans, for Hispanics are really important. And I think we don't do a good enough job out there. And I think adult programs are important, because the last thing that I'll say about this is that our recent research, especially nationwide, but also in Georgia, a couple of southeastern states, that hunting for meat is becoming a more and more it's been a long day, is increasing at a fairly high rate. That is when you ask hunters, what is the primary reason that you hunt? Do you hunt for a trophy? Do you hunt for meat? Blah, blah, blah. That hunters who hunt primarily for the meat has increased dramatically. And so there's a growing community of people saying, well, you know, we think we can get more urban and suburban residents hunting for for reasons that other than what we hunt for. And that is primarily for the meat, primarily for what we call the locavore movement and things like that. So I think that there's room, yes, in our repertoire of recruitment and retention programs to bring in adults. So I sounded like a politician, didn't I? Blah, 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 and that. But the point is that I think yes, but I think there's a great debate of saying, is it better to recruit adults than kids? I'm really not there yet on that. I would say the more programs you can have, the better. I would also say that tying those programs and evaluating those programs to actual license buying is one of the most important things on whether a program works. I can stand up here and say this program works, but I think, is Mike not here anymore, they're doing a really big evaluation, Tennessee Wildlife Federation, on their programs. And it's tying it, we did a program, is it really making a hunter? Is it really making a license buyer? Are we really making a person who's buying a fishing license? Are we really creating a long-term constituent in terms of money that we're spending on them, and what is our return on investment? So sort of answered it.
I read yesterday or day before that there's more whites dying than being born, and that there's more non-whites, Hispanics being born than there are whites. My question is, are there any programs within any other agencies that you know of that have a real drive to recruit non-whites or Hispanics into hunting and fishing?
Yeah, great question. The best program right now, really the leading edge, is that Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation. If you just go to their website, RBFF, they've got some really good research that's being done, some really good programs, everything they're translating actually into Spanish. That would be the best example, in my opinion, of somebody who's really taking the bull by its horns and trying to understand attitudes of a very non-traditional constituent group. Recreational Boating and Fishing is probably just rbff.org. But actually some money, as I said, about $12-13 million a year of sport fish restoration money is going to that organization to do this very thing, and they've done a nice job at it.
How about hunting?
Good question. No, nothing comes to my mind that's very good in recruiting non-traditional audiences to hunting. I can tell you that one of my favorite recruitment and retention programs is one of your sister southeastern states. Alabama has a really good program with small game, and they do a really good job on that, and it's done for a variety of reasons. It's a program that's done annually, and that's important. When we talk about recruitment retention, you'll hear this, one shot kind of a thing, and one of the things you don't want to do is just do a program and then leave. I mean, that does anybody good. The evaluations have shown that if you do a program once, sort of a one and done program, if you will, that you're not going to get any return on your investment. That you've got to have a program that's more long-term, that gives kids or adults the tools that they need to truly become a hunter, to truly become an angler, that it needs to be repetitive. The Alabama program comes in every single year, and it's in open. It's usually small game, pheasants and other things. It's done in the open so people can come and watch what they do. You don't have to. And think about how you're recruited into hunting. You probably didn't have a gun in your hand for the first few years. You probably went out with groups of your father and your grandfather and stuff. It's important to bring kids out and expose them without maybe not having to shoot per se. It's done every year. It's a tradition. The community is involved with that program. So that would be sort of, in my opinion, the best recruitment program that I've seen. And the numbers actually showed that program truly was increasing the number of hunters and hunting licenses in the state in our evaluation. On the other hand, our research shows that there are programs that don't do any good. If your program is too difficult, you don't want to be involved with that. If a kid has never fished before, don't start him out fly fishing, right? You know, oh, I got Billy's ear. I mean, kids don't want to suck at stuff, and you want kids. Am I allowed to say that? I mean, kids, the one thing that drives kids out of all sports, I have a statistician on board that has a PhD in recreational development, and his whole PhD comes down to one thing, probably. You know, kids don't want to suck at stuff. At a certain age in baseball, some kids realize they're not Derek Jeter, you know, or the University of Virginia baseball team. So, no, we had a bunch of ragtags. Is that people don't want to be bad at things. I actually evaluated a program in a southeastern state on shooting that the kids who went in, about 80 or 90% of them were really interested in going shooting. When they came out, about 40% were. The program actually had the very opposite effect. And why was that? Because it was too difficult. And they I can't do this. This is too hard. I stink at it. And so there's a lot of questions about recruitment and retention. There's a growing body of work out there on what to do and what not to do, and I'd be glad to help you with that. In fact, we have a grant right now with the Fish and Wildlife Service to develop a book on sort of the whole best practices, what works and what doesn't. The other really good program that's happening right now is the Wildlife Management Institute is doing some really good evaluation of recruitment and retention. And I don't know if you've had Matt Dunphy down here, but he's sort of the person for that and is doing a really good job going to states and talking about the different programs and what works and what doesn't. So it'll complement in terms of complementary research and stuff to what we do. So that's also another person. So
What was his name again?
Matt Dunphy, Dunfee, Wildlife Management Institute.
Thank you.
Lunchtime?
No, Commissioner Cox had one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there's so much information here, so little time, but we talked about, in all these budget meetings we've had, we've kind of danced around and not really got a strategic plan for retention and recruitment. And I think it's probably one of the more important things we do. So perhaps, Director Carter, we might think about having a committee meeting and then kind of about retention and recruitment, and have Mr. Duda back and ask all of these questions and try to focus on what we really need to do. I mean, we talked about 25 things in the budget committees, and we don't really have a plan to do that. So it might be something I'd suggest that we might try to do.
I actually do a 2-day workshop on recruitment and retention. So we're actually, the basis of the book that we're writing is on that. So I'd be glad to even give you the PowerPoint on that or whatever you want. So a lot of good information out there in terms of what to do and what not to do. Thank you.
All right, any more questions from the commission? Any from the audience? I think Director Carter said if some of the commissioners wanted, he could get a stick drive or whatever you call those little jump drives, yeah, of his presentation.
With your permission, of
Oh,
course.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. Well done project. Thank you very much. I know it was hard to compress everything into what you had. I mean, what time you had, but we sure appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
it was
Much appreciated.
give us a lot to think about, and hopefully we can get some good ideas from you and expand on that. So,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to take about a 5-minute break because. Thank you.